Pippin, was the quiet, dependable powerhouse of the original Band of the Hawk, a gentle giant through and through. He rarely spoke, always kept his cool even after Guts elbowed him, and was fiercely protective of Rickard, who was usually by his side. Despite his gentle nature, he's an absolute beast on the battlefield. With a single swing of his mace, Pippin can crush the armored skull of just about anyone. His sheer strength is unmatched by anyone in the Band of the Hawk, except for Guts during the Golden Age arc. In fact, Guts even jokes about the two of them being the Band of the Hawk power duo, since Pippin, just like Guts, can tear through enemies like it's nothing. Pippin's calm, caring nature made him one of the most lovable characters in Berserk, which makes his tragic death during the Eclipse hit like a truck. When Griffith sacrificed the Hawk to ascend as a member of the God Hand, the Eclipse turned into a grotesque massacre. Ever the protector, Pippin threw himself into the chaos to save Casca, when a monstrous apostle attacked her. Smashing the creature's head with his hammer, Pippin gave her a fighting chance to escape with Judo. As Casca was carried away, Pippin stood his ground, determined to buy time, even as apostles closed in from all sides. What followed was beyond horrific. As Guts battled his way through the slaughter, he caught sight of Pippin on a hill and rushed towards him, only to realize that something was horribly wrong. Pippin didn't move or speak, and then Guts noticed the awful truth. Pippin's body had been hollowed out, his back ripped open, and he was propped up like a grotesque puppet, held up by tentacles in the shadows. Before Guts could react, Pippin's lifeless body was torn in two by a slug-like apostle, which then hurled the remains aside to attack Guts. His death was one of the most gut-wrenching moments that cemented a fan favorite's tragic end as an unforgettable piece of the story's brutal legacy. Rebel Refugee. Given a new mission by the Holy See, Farnese and the Holy Iron Chain Knights are escorting an armored carriage on the way to the city of Albion. Refugees gather as they whisper in fear, seeing the carriage by the marked massive wooden wheels on top, which is a symbol of Father Mozgus's dark reputation. Mozgus, the Holy See's Inquisitor infamous for his brutal torture methods, has been sent to Albion to oversee the situation there. People claim his death toll rivals that of war itself. As the convoy moves along a ridge, a group of rebels fires arrows at the carriage. Their aim is futile against its armor, but their anger is real. They want revenge for loved ones killed under Mozgus's orders. Two of the rebels manage to break into the carriage, but before they can do much, one is taken out by a giant metal claw launched from within, smashing into his face and yanking him out with brutal force. Mozgus's masked torturers then emerge to handle the rebels. One wields massive scissors to slice enemies in half, another crushes foes with a giant wheel, and a fourth wields a strange spear, with a ring-shaped head that lets him catch enemies by the throat, locking them in like a collar. Mozgus then finally steps out of his carriage, annoyed by all the chaos. Farnese immediately apologizes for letting the attackers get through their defenses. Curious about the masked men fighting for him, Farnese asks about them. Mozgus describes them as his torturers, who work directly under him and follow his every order. He orders the surviving rebels to line up before him. One rebel, still trapped in a spear-like collar, screams that Mozgus slaughtered his village's women and children after labeling them as heretics. Mozgus then explains that those heretics deserved punishment for not giving offerings to the Holy See. The Inquisitor justifies it as divine justice, claiming that he was acting according to the Holy See's doctrine. The rebel continues to yell and explains that his people have nothing left to offer, as they were all starving. He then cries out that God will punish him someday, and that's when Mozgus snaps. In an instant, Mozgus grabs a massive scripture book, raises it high, and slams it down on the man's head. The blow is so powerful that it shatters the rebel's skull, killing him instantly and hit with so much force that it even bulged out his eyeballs. It's a chilling moment. Being executed with a blunt book is much more brutal and agonizing than being killed by a blade or weapon. It's a twisted symbol of Mozgus's blind faith, where even Holy Scripture becomes a weapon of suffering. This death is easily one of the most painful and disturbing in the Berserk series, showing the horrifying lengths that Mozgus goes through in the name of divine punishment. Hannah and the women in the Troll's Den. In Enoch Village, chaos unfolds as the men gather around a barn, armed with whatever farm tools they can find. Inside the barn, a troll is feasting on the body of a man named Ted. His wife Hannah hurls a rock at the troll in a desperate attempt to save her husband. This only enrages the troll, and it charges towards her and assaults her. Hannah's brother Horace steps in and rams his pitchfork into the troll's nose. The creature backs off and retreats into the barn. Horace takes this chance to get Hannah to safety, but freezes when he realizes what's lurking in the dark. The barn is crawling with trolls, dozens of them. They then swarm out, killing Horace and abducting Hannah. Later, when the Black Swordsman party arrives to save the village and fend off another troll invasion, Shirke uses magic to wash the trolls away, using a massive flood. In the chaos, Farnese and Casca are accidentally swept up in the water and captured by the trolls. Farnese regains consciousness inside a dark cave, and using Shirke's thought transference, confirms that she and Casca are physically unharmed. But the relief is short-lived. Farnese notices strange creatures feasting on women's corpses, and as she wakes Casca, the two are forced to run from the advancing monsters. Shirke urges Farnese to stay calm through the mind link, but things only get worse. The two stumble deeper into the cave, where they witness a horrifying sight of women being assaulted by trolls. One troll finishes with a woman, drags her lifeless body, and throws it into a pit filled with more grotesque creatures waiting to devour it. Among the women is Hannah, who is barely alive after enduring brutal torture. She crawls towards Farnese and Casca begging for help. Moments later, she curls into a fetal position and clutches her stomach in agony. Her screams echo through the cave as her stomach swells and bursts open. From the gruesome wound, several baby trolls emerge. The horrifying truth then sinks in. This is how the trolls reproduce. They've been abducting women to use as breeding vessels, and kidnapping children as food. The nightmare finally ends when Guts storms the den. With his unmatched skill, he slaughters all the trolls, while the rest of the crew rescues the surviving women and children, putting an end to the horrors of the trolls' lair. Sacrificial women for the Man-Made Beherit. While Griffith was pulling off his plan to rescue Charlotte from Ganishka by staging an all-out assault on Windham, Rakshas had his own thing going on. He lured Salat and the Tapasa to a mysterious temple. When they cautiously made their way in, they eventually reached the top of the main chamber and looked down to find something straight out of a nightmare. Suspended in the air by chains was a grotesque living mass of flesh. It was surrounded by fleshy pods hanging from the ceiling and connected to the main mass by tubes that apparently feed it. On the ground, some guards are pouring barrels of liquid into the pods. Then things take a horrific turn. Salat heard the terrifying screams of a pregnant woman, who was nude and trembling as she was being lowered into a hole that opened in the mass of flesh, while a group of Harashada sits in front of the fleshy vat performing hand signs. The woman's arms are tied so she couldn't fight back. While being dipped into the amniotic fluid, the baby in her womb kicks violently inside of her, until her stomach bursts open. This was no normal baby. This creature had horns and sharp teeth, and definitely not human. Salat had just witnessed the creation of the Daka, monstrous soldiers in Emperor Ganishka's army. The baby was then ejected out of the flesh through another hole and taken by the guards to a cage filled with other Daka infants. Meanwhile, the woman's lifeless body, stomach torn open, was pulled out of the fleshy vat and thrown atop a pile filled with other sacrificial women's bodies. That's when Rakshas decided to show up, and he dropped some knowledge for the bewildered Bakiraka. He explained that the mass of flesh was made by countless fused apostles. Since apostles are connected to the astral world, feeding pregnant women to this contraption, known as the Man-Made Beherit, corrupts their unborn babies and turns them into Daka. The whole setup was the brainchild of the Kushan sorcerer Daiba, designed to create an army of monsters, but the real reason it exists is way darker. Later on, Ganishka uses the Man-Made Behelit to transform himself into a colossal godlike entity, to go beyond even the apostles in power, all in preparation for a showdown with Griffith. The pregnant women sacrificed by the Man-Made Behelit endured unimaginable torment. Just like the women in the Troll's Den, they were forcefully impregnated to serve as vessels for creating Daka, and thrown into a pool of amniotic fluid. Their babies didn't just kill them, they violently tore their way out, leaving the women in excruciating pain before dying in agony. It's a deeply chilling reflection of how utterly dehumanized these women had become in service of creating monsters for war, making their deaths among the most horrific in the series. Bazuso, better known as the Grey Knight, had a fearsome reputation on the battlefield. People called him the 30-man slayer because he supposedly took out over 30 men in one fight, and he also managed to kill a bear on his own. Not exactly someone you'd want to mess with. His weapon of choice is a massive poleaxe that matched his intimidating size, allowing him to send people flying with a single swing, even using just one arm. When we first meet Bazuso, he's holding down a fortress under siege and just casually slaughtering mercenaries who tried to infiltrate his ground. The mercenaries' employer puts on a bounty for Bazuso's head, promising any reward to the one who brings him down. That's when a young, scrappy Guts steps up. At this point, Guts is just a wandering mercenary looking to make a name for himself. After haggling, Guts strikes a deal. He'll take out Bazuso for 7 gold coins. Bazuso doesn't take Guts seriously at first, as he figures he can crush the kid without breaking a sweat. But when the fight starts, it's clear that Guts isn't just some rookie. The two go toe-to-toe in a brutal clash. After some intense back and forth, Guts manages to break Bazuso's massive poleaxe, and delivers a devastating slash to the big man's waist, which brings him to his knees. In his final moments, Bazuso tries to plead with Guts, and asks him to wait, but Guts doesn't hesitate. He drives his massive sword straight down into Bazuso's head and splits it halfway down the middle. The force is so brutal that one of Bazuso's eyes even pops out, simply from the impact. Bazuso's death wasn't just physically gruesome, it was emotionally brutal as well. This guy, once known for his sheer strength and terrifying reputation, was brought down by a 15-year-old mercenary right in front of everyone. Then, in what should have been a moment for last words or mercy, Guts showed none. Wyald was a straight-up monster in every sense of the word. As a leader of the Black Dog Knights, an army made up of Midland's worst criminals, this guy thrived on chaos and violence. His men were convicted of the worst crimes you could imagine, and they followed Wyald's lead into doing some of the most despicable things imaginable. When the Band of the Hawk rescued Griffith and started their escape from Windham, Wyald's squad was sent by the King of Midland to hunt them down. On the way, Wyald's group came across a farm that had helped the Hawk and slaughtered everyone there and assaulted the women. When Wyald finally caught up to the Hawks, they end up getting wrecked by the traps set for them. Only Wyald and a few of his men survive, but things escalate into an all-out fight. Deciding he was done playing around, he revealed his apostle form, a horrifying giant monstrosity, and squared off against Guts. After a long, brutal battle, Guts manages to critically wound him. For the first time in 100 years, Wyald was taken down and left for dead. But of course this guy wasn't going down easily. Wyald faked being dead, killed the scouts watching over his corpse, and crawled to the Band of the Hawk's camp. In a desperate move to save his own life, he grabbed Griffith and tried to trigger the Eclipse early, hoping to avoid getting dragged into the vortex of souls. To make matters worse, he stripped Griffith in front of everyone to reveal just how much torture the guy had endured. However, he panicked when he couldn't find Griffith's behelit. That's when Nosferatu Zod shows up, and of course Wyald did not see this coming. Zod then impales him on his horns, and made it clear that Griffith's behelit wasn't meant for Wyald's petty schemes. Wyald begged for mercy and tried to justify everything by saying that he was just following the God Hand's one law, do as thou wilt, or do as you would. Zod wasn't having it though. He ripped Wyald's stomach open, while shouting that Griffith was more important than anything Wyald could comprehend. In the end, Wyald's spiritual essence was dragged into the abyss, while his body reverted to the frail old man he used to be. His death was a perfect storm of physical agony, humiliation, and karmic justice. Gaston was the second in command of the Band of the Hawk's Raiders unit, which was led by Guts. He was loyal, hardworking, and always had high spirits. He wasn't just a soldier, but also a close friend, someone who brought optimism and a sense of camaraderie to the group. Gaston respected Guts deeply, not just as a leader, but as someone that he could trust. After every battle, he was the guy you'd find laughing, drinking, and celebrating with the rest of the crew. But he had dreams beyond the battlefield. After making it through the Battle of Doldry, Gaston decided to leave the band and chase his dream of opening a clothing shop in Windham. But when he heard the band had been exiled, he couldn't just sit around. He dropped everything and rejoined them. He ditched his dream without hesitation in order to stand with his family. Along with other raiders in the band, he cries in joy when Guts returns and comes to their aid, still addressing him as Captain Guts. With Griffith no longer capable of leading, and the band on the brink of disbandment, Gaston and the rest of the raiders pledged their loyalty to Guts as their new commander, asking him to take them with him. This made Guts realize that they were his family, and somehow regretted leaving them. But then came the Eclipse. Like nearly everyone in the band, Gaston was sacrificed during Griffith's horrifying ascension to become Femto. After the nightmare began and the band was being slaughtered, Guts desperately calls out for survivors, clinging to any hope that someone might still be alive. And for a moment, it seemed like there really was hope when Gaston stumbled over to him. But Gaston was in terrible shape. He's missing an arm, covered in wounds, and barely standing. Still though, he was still able to speak, and asked Guts how things had gone so horribly wrong. He even admitted that he'd always had a weird feeling of unease since their first encounter with Zod, like something dark was hanging over them. Despite everything, he remembered the good times, the celebrations, the victories, and even expressed how Griffith had always seemed almost too perfect. And then things took a turn for the worse. Gaston collapses into Guts' arms, and his forehead suddenly starts swelling unnaturally. Guts begged him to hold on, but before he could do anything, Gaston's head suddenly explodes, right there in Guts' arms. An apostle emerged from Gaston's neck, while the remains of his body were twisted and desecrated. Guts tried to strike it down with Gaston's own sword, but the monster swam away in a sea of blood. Gaston's final moments weren't just about his suffering, they were about Guts' suffering as well. Imagine holding one of your closest friends, only to watch them die in your arms in such a violent and dehumanizing way. It's a haunting reminder of just how merciless the world of Berserk is. Donovan was a low-life mercenary under Gambino, Guts' adoptive father. He was ruthless on the battlefield and never hesitated to kill enemies, even the ones that were trying to flee. But his real cruelty showed off the battlefield. One night after a mission, Donovan approached Gambino with a dark request. That same night, 9-year-old Guts couldn't sleep. He then noticed a shadow moving outside his tent, and before he could react, Donovan barges in uninvited. Sensing something was wrong, Guts reached for his sword, but Donovan pinned him down. Guts was overpowered despite his best efforts to fight back. That's when Donovan revealed the horrifying truth that he had paid Gambino 3 silver coins to let him have his way with Guts. Guts was left completely broken, as Donovan committed the despicable act. It was later revealed that Gambino had sold Guts out because of his resentment towards the boy, blaming him for his wife's death and the way that Guts clung on to him like a shadow. Some time passed, and during a battle in the forest, Guts finally got his chance for revenge. He watched Donovan slaughtering stragglers from the enemy force. Before taking action, Guts then shoots him in the back with a crossbow, which catches him off guard. As Donovan staggers, Guts fires another arrow into his open mouth. But Guts wasn't done yet. He demanded answers about who sold him out. After Donovan confirmed it was Gambino, Guts didn't hesitate. He rammed his sword down Donovan's throat, ending his life in the most brutal way possible. Donovan's death wasn't quick or clean. He was hunted down, shot in the back, silenced with a bolt to the mouth, and then killed in the most humiliating and agonizing way possible. And every bit of pain he endured was well earned, for the monstrous crime he committed. Kushan soldiers. After his humiliating defeat at the hands of Griffith, Ganishka decides to take a desperate gamble to surpass even the mightiest apostles. He heads to the Daka creation room, where the grotesque Man-Made Beherit is housed. He climbs onto the hook, typically used to lower sacrificial women, into the writhing mass of flesh. Ignoring Daiba's protests, Ganishka orders the hook to descend, as he is determined to be reincarnated into something much greater. As the ritual begins, a dense fog starts seeping out of the temple and starts spreading through Windhem. The civilians remain safely indoors, but the Kushan soldiers patrolling the streets aren't so lucky. Upon coming into contact with the fog, the soldiers disintegrate instantly, with their bodies being reduced to dust in seconds. Animals and humans alike perish in the same horrifying way. The fog isn't just killing them, it's feeding their life force into the mass of flesh to supercharge Ganishka's transformation. As a result, Ganishka emerges as a towering godlike monstrosity, his height so immense that even Windhem's tallest towers barely reach his knees. His very presence dwarfs the city, and his colossal feet crush entire battalions of his own army with every step. Soldiers who had sworn loyalty to him are reduced to nothing but unrecognizable pools of blood and mangled flesh under his enormous weight. But Ganishka's rampage doesn't end there. His movements unleash chaos as he breathes devastating fire from many mouths, scorching the land and annihilating any remaining soldiers in his path. As if that wasn't bad enough, the pools of crushed Kushan soldiers begin twisting and stirring, grotesquely reforming into giant tentacled spawns that bear a horrifying resemblance to Ganishka's monstrous form. These spawns, dripping blood from their orifices, mindlessly devour the few Kushan soldiers who manage to survive. The Kushan soldiers' deaths under Ganishka were nothing short of horrifying. First, they were betrayed by the very fog they believed was protecting them, with their bodies disintegrating into nothingness without warning. Those unlucky enough to avoid the fog faced the crushing weight of Ganishka's towering form, or the fiery wrath of his breath. Even in death they found no peace. Some were reanimated into abominable spawns, and forced to become monsters that slaughtered their own comrades. What makes their deaths even more tragic is their loyalty to the Emperor, who saw them as nothing more than tools to fuel his transformation. Griffith. When Guts decided to leave the Band of the Hawk to chase his own dreams, it wasn't just a blow to Griffith's pride. It was the first crack in his carefully constructed persona. In the wake of Guts' departure, Griffith started spiraling. That very night, he seduces Princess Charlotte in a desperate act to reclaim his sense of control. However, this ultimately sealed his downfall. He's arrested the next morning for treason and was thrown into the underground prison in the Tower of Rebirth. Griffith's punishment was far from ordinary imprisonment. The king, enraged by Griffith's defilement of Charlotte, personally whipped him and ordered his prolonged torture, and the torturer made sure that Griffith's suffering was unimaginably brutal. Over the next year, Griffith endured countless horrors. His tendons were slashed, his body burned with hot irons, and his skin peeled to expose raw flesh. His nails were ripped out and left to grow back, only to be torn off again. His tongue was also cut out and turned into a sick trophy. By the time Guts and the Hawk rescued him, Griffith was a shadow of his former self. He was emaciated and crippled, and he could no longer speak, fight, or even stand on his own. His body was broken beyond repair, and his once glorious dream of ruling a kingdom now seemed out of reach. After being rescued, Griffith found himself haunted by the vision of his younger ambitious self. In a desperate, pathetic act, he tried to take his own life by ramming his throat into a sharp root, but failed even at that. As he sat by the water feeling defeated, his crimson behelit resurfaced from the lake bed. When his blood dripped onto it, it triggered a solar eclipse, and sent Griffith, Guts, and the Band of the Hawk into another dimension. There he was greeted by the God Hand, who gave him an ultimate offer. To regain his dream, Griffith would need to sacrifice what remained of his humanity. Faced with this choice, Griffith reflected on his deepest desires and regrets. He realized that Guts was the only person who had ever made him forget his ambition, but Griffith's dream was more important to him than anything else, and that included the Band of the Hawk. With a chilling sense of resolve, he uttered the words, "I sacrifice," dooming his comrades to be branded as sacrifices. What follows is one of the most brutal moments in the series, as the Band of the Hawk is slaughtered by an unrelenting horde of apostles. Guts and Casca, the only survivors, could only watch as Griffith was reborn as Femto, an official member of the God Hand. This wasn't just a physical transformation, it was the official death of everything human about Griffith. In the end, Griffith's death wasn't a single moment, it was a slow and agonizing unraveling of his identity, leading to his rebirth as a monster, and while his physical body ascended, his soul in many ways met its end, making his quote death one of the most haunting in Berserk. Let us know in the comments below if you thought we missed any more deaths that were much more gruesome, but in the meantime, click the video you see on your screen right now to learn about every apostle in Berserk, and we'll see you there.